I'd like you to meet a man who was the model for almost every rock and roll performer during the 50s and years thereafter. A true rock and roll legend. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the greatest, Little Richard. Why is it, Richard, after 26 years in the business, you're as big, if not bigger than ever? What's the secret of success?
I think it's that because I've been really doing it. You know, the Bible says, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." I've been free.
You've been an honest man in your
I've been
work.
an honest man. Been broke, but honest.
Do a little name dropping. You headlined the show when the Beatles and the Stones were little boys in knickers.
That's right. I met the Rolling Stones in the back of a truck.
You're kidding.
Mick Jagger in the truck singing himself away. I met the Beatles in Liverpool with Brian Epstein. He brought me there. His record shop did.
That's unbelievable. Does it bother you when somebody says you're a rock and roll legend? I even said that in the introduction.
It makes me feel good to know that I've been a part of something that is growing and won't stop, and got a living root to it that has been planted and can't nobody take it out, and it's down there.
When did you start? How young were you?
10 years old.
Do you think it makes a lot of difference to start when you're young being a musician?
I think so, because I hadn't started plucking in. I don't think I'd be plucking now, because I would have been with the rest of the fellas. Everybody else started plucking and started doing something else.
Are you the only musical member of your family?
I'm the only one. All the rest of my brothers holler, but I sing.
Did you ever work with Stevie Wonder anywhere along the line?
Yes, I worked with Stevie years ago, Dick. I played Washington, D.C. with him when he was real young, and I was the only time I've been nervous in the business because I had to go on behind Stevie Wonder, you know, and he's one of the greatest.
That was Richard Penniman, also known as Little Richard. He died May 9th on Friday. Over the weekend, his son actually posted that he died. Born December 5th, 1932 in Macon, Georgia. His father was a church deacon and a brick mason and a bootleg moonshiner. Jim McCaskill's here. And that was Dick Clark interviewing him when Dick Clark used to do that back in the day. He was one of the people, the foundation of that kind of American Bandstand, which I think was a ripoff. Anyway, we'll get into that another day. We're talking about Dick Clark another day, not today. I want to really celebrate Little Richard, who, as I mentioned early on, gave us the foundations of what they call rock and roll, which has been usurped now. But there's no rock and roll without Chuck Berry and a host of others, but specifically Little Richard, because he also brought a showmanship that had never been seen before, a flamboyance that had that gave us a David Bowie and a Rod Stewart and a Mick Jagger and an Elvis.
And an Elvis and seeing people get up, stand up and play the piano standing up, and all of the the performance and the whole 9 yards that you can see a million white rock artists do post Little Richard. I mean, you think about the fact that the Beatles once opened for Little Richard.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, you got to think about this man's history and what he started, and someone who had a lot of starts and stops in their career, who, you talk about, you and I were talking about, I love Black scientists who are also people of faith, right? And we were talking about that offline about how, it hits different when you have someone who's a scientist who also believes in God. I think it's interesting if you look at, Little Richard's life and how he was, this secular superstar and tried to go back to his gospel roots at different points because he had, the church pulling on him and telling him how he should live and how he should think and all of these things, being from a religious, really, really religious family, and his struggles, with his professional life and whether to do secular music or gospel music, as well as in his personal life, because, he, talked about his flamboyance and talked about being gay and all of those things. And then at different points in his life, talked about the fact that, being a homosexual was something that was contagious, that you don't get it naturally. And he had, all of these stops and starts and back and forth. in his personal life with his own, reconciling with his sexuality and what he showed on camera and all of those things. But as an artist, the music and the musicality, the genius of it all,
well,
that's one thing that never sort of failed or faltered.
I wanted to focus, and the reason why I played that interview first, and I have another piece, another couple of pieces that I want to play from Little Richard, but I want to play that piece because he said, I'm free. I may be broke, but I'm free. And there's something to be said. Freedom comes with a price, but freedom, you evolve into freedom as you know your limits, as you know yourself. You become more and more free as you start to become more and more comfortable with who you are. And I thought that was really powerful. But I wanted to talk about the broke part for a second because, it's Monday Mover, and I wanted to, kind of highlight why he was broke. We talked last week with Shantavia Johnson, who is a patent expert, and I'm going to have her on more frequently and talk more frequently off mic as well. But she was talking about Lonnie Johnson, who is the inventor of the Super Soaker. And she said he's one of her favorite inventors because of the power plays that he had. Now he invented something that he licensed to Hasbro, and Hasbro had to pay him because they weren't paying him his royalties. He sued and got $72.9 million back in 2013 in back royalties that they owed him. But he was getting money every year from them, and he got a lump sum up front and still owned his own invention. And I said, that's a power play.
Yeah.
Little Richard came into a music industry where we were talking earlier at the top of the show about not knowing the business and not knowing what questions to ask and not knowing what types of deals to negotiate, right? And so for Little Richard, it was, he put all of this music out there but didn't benefit from it. And, it's really crazy that you talk about Tutti Frutti, which was owned by something called Specialty Records, and they had the right to the song. They paid $50 for Tutti Frutti, his first hit single. They gave him, in his contract, he got a half a cent for each record sold. He said, I was a dumb black kid, and my mama had 12 kids, and my daddy was dead. And he said, I wanted to help them, so I took whatever was offered. He got a half a cent off of each record, half a cent. Tutti Frutti sold 500,000 copies, and he earned $25,000. Wow. Think about that. He earned $25,000 off of a record that sold 500,000 copies back in the 1950s. His contract was typical, though. Artists would get between 3 to 5%. Little Richard received no royalties. When his hits were used in movies, covered by white singers, which was common back then, wasn't nothing for Pat Boone to sing one of your songs. Yeah. You ain't get nothing for it. Yeah. That's crazy when you think about that. And you think about the impact of that. In 1984, he sued Specialty Records for $112 million, saying that they had not paid him royalties for a label that he left back in 1959. And he settled for an undisclosed amount. So he got some money, but he didn't get $112 million. And we all know that the Beatles, Little Richard's music, along with the Beatles catalog, was purchased by Michael Jackson in the 1980s. And this was the respect that you got to have for Michael Jackson, because the story goes, and shout out to Paul McCartney, who's still alive, that Michael Jackson, while people looked at him like this guy that was weird with bubbles, that liked to, hang around with children at Neverland, he was not just an astute businessman, he was brilliant, but he also knew how to ask questions. And I don't know if he was playing possum with Paul McCartney. And what's funny about people share information with you if they think you're not going to do anything with it.
Right. Or if they think you're not smart enough to do anything with it.
Which obviously Paul McCartney did not see Michael Jackson's genius, because he willfully shared all of the information about royalties. He told him about profiting from his own songs. He was the first person to tell Michael Jackson about publishing rights and how he could go about. He gave him the blueprint for how to purchase the rights of other artists as a business investment. He gave him the whole blueprint. And you know what Michael Jackson did? He went out and did it. So, and then Paul McCartney had nerve to be mad at him because he didn't value his genius. He didn't know he was smart. So how dare you be mad at somebody for taking the very blueprint that you gave him? Yeah. So Michael Jackson bought Paul McCartney's Beatles, Buddy Holly, and Little Richard's catalog. back in the 1980s. He paid $47.5 million. And I want you to just kind of understand this. A group that was headed out by Geffen was trying to buy it. Charles Koppelman, since we're talking about billions, Brian Koppelman is he's a magnet. He's a giant in the music industry, Charles Koppelman. He also is Jenny Hutt, who's on our station as well on Sirius XM. Shout out to Jenny Hutt, just Jenny. That's their dad. He was he also put a bid in, and Richard Branson. Michael Jackson outbid all of them. $47.5 million he got for this catalog. And in 1995, he sold half of it to Sony for $95 million. Sold half of it for $95 million. After his death in 2016, his estate, they sold the other half to Sony for $750 million. So that $47.5 million investment back in 1987 turned into damn near $1 billion.
Almost $1 billion.
So that's how you do that.
That's how that gets done. That's how that gets done. It's interesting too, because one of the things that I loved about Little Richard, aside from his unapologetic way of showing up, how just his unapologetic way of showing up, how just, for lack of a better way of saying it, just how the fuck he wanted to show up, right? Which was typically with, straight hair and a whole lot of makeup on and the occasional, green eye contact lens or whatever. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he wanted to do. But the fact that he also was really honest about how much money he lost, about how he got cheated out of money. Because
wait. Is it cheated? Is it? So I mean, there's a line here, right? I wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it, right? Because we're people that are called in a different kind of way, right? We answer to a different power. But is it cheating somebody out of something if they don't ask the right questions? Is it cheating them if they don't know you would hope they would know, but is it your responsibility in that seat on the other side of the table to say, hey, this is a bad deal?
Yeah, I struggle with that when it comes to artists and when it comes to people of color, because I grew up in Atlanta as a young adult when Atlanta was a huge music scene, and there were tons of artists who came through Atlanta who spent very large portions of their careers broke, but the people who signed them and things like that were incredibly wealthy. And so I have a bit of a problem with the notion that the people who create art don't get to profit from it in a way that's commensurate with the large S of their artistry, right? Like I feel like that there's something that's amiss there, that someone who pushes a piece of paper associated with a song in the key of life written by a man who has never seen a ribbon in the sky before should get potentially more money off of that artistry than the person who conceptualized that.
I agree. I mean, I agree. But I think the challenge should be, as you said at the top of the show, for us to make sure that we know what we need to know, to share the information, the knowledge, to get in. But Little Richard was in a certain time in the 1950s when we were still, Black folks were still drinking from separate water fountains and couldn't go to hotels in certain states in this union. Black people couldn't marry white people in his time, right? So, I mean, that's how deep it was. He said, I had signed a very bad deal with Specialty Records. And if you wanted a record deal, you signed on their terms or you didn't record. So he said, I got a half a cent for every record. Whoever heard of cutting a penny in half, it didn't matter how many records I sold. If you were Black, it didn't matter how many records you sold. He said the publishing rights were sold to the record label before the record was even released. So, it's tough. I mean, that's from his biography, The Life and Times of Little Richard. But I mean, you're absolutely correct. I think you're absolutely correct. But I think moving forward is much like this conversation we're having around Corona. What do we do next, right? There are people out there listening. You want to go into business. You want to become this. You want to become that. Hopefully you don't want to become a football player. According to Dr. Marlo Bennett, that is not something we should be doing. But we need to be in spaces where we get to know all of the things that we should know before we even step in.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I had sat at the feet of somebody before I stepped in, but there was also a level of like, oh, I know what I'm doing. But there's layers to this, because you're talking about untalented people making money off of talent for the rest of their life. Multiple different talent, right?
Yeah.
And if folk out there broke right now who put that talent into the universe, there's something inherently wrong with that. I couldn't agree more. But I think some of the onus has to be on us to learn.
Yeah. And I think that, I think that there should also be a culture of just being honest about the mistakes that we've made in the business to younger people who are coming into the business, and making it known, not necessarily as I'm gonna get the people back who got me, but as a cautionary tale. And I feel like every time Little Richard got on anybody's stage or anybody's platform, he made it very clear that, they put records out on me. They stole my music. They stole my royalties. They didn't pay me for this. They didn't pay me for that. And I think it genuinely was I'm going to tell my story so that nobody else gets to tell it for me. But it was also, I felt like, to a certain extent, a cautionary tale. Like, they did all of that. I'm still here. Don't let it happen to you.
Perfect. And that should be the thing too. You should not want anybody else to go through what you've been through.